Tonight, we're very lucky to have Ron Eckstein talking about the bald eagle. His title is The Fall and Rise of a Northwoods Icon. Ron received his bachelor's and master's degree from UW-Madison, and he was a Wisconsin DNR wildlife biologist in Rhinelander for many years. Ron's topic tonight is bald eagles, and he really knows his stuff. During his tenure with the DNR, Ron banded over 1,300 nestling bald eagles, and he's worked tirelessly to protect eagle and osprey nest sites. Now Ron volunteers for the Wisconsin DNR, still working with eagles and ospreys and old-growth forests. Ron's going to tell us about the decline and remarkable resurgence of bald eagles in Wisconsin over the last 30 years. Now, as usual, we have a little trivia contest here regarding poor Ron here. So 3 of the following 4 items I'm going to give you are true about Ron. So you have to figure out which one is false and in which way. Okay, the first one is, he found all of these things in eagle nests: a rabbit's foot, a turtle shell, a corn cob, a tennis ball, and over 100 fishing baits. Number 2, he climbed up a 90-foot pine tree while eagle banding, only to see the nest 20 feet away in the next tree. Did he really climb the wrong tree? All right, number 3. Drove 60 miles per hour down the highway with the talons of an adult eagle embedded in his arm. Okay, 4th possibility. He wrestled with an eagle tangled in a badminton net. Okay, what do you think? Number 3? Going 60 miles an hour down the highway? Nope, that was actually true. It was number 4. He did not wrestle with an eagle tangled in a badminton net. It was an 8-point buck tangled in a badminton net, not an eagle. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Ron, and before I do, though, we're going to turn it over to questions and answers, and I'll remind you about this, but do remember that if you talk into the microphone, we're going to have one microphone going around so that poor Ron doesn't have to repeat the questions. But we have only one microphone being handed out by one person, and if you would, talk right into the microphone so that we can hear you nice and loudly. Okay, so take it away, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? This thing on? Okay, here we go. So we're going to talk about bald eagles. I was lucky enough to work with bald eagles for many years when I worked with the Department of Natural Resources. And the title is The Fall and the Rise of Bald Eagles. So first I'm going to do a little description of the bald eagle to introduce you to the bald eagle, and then the fall, and then the rise. And I have about 15 minutes or so to do that, and then of course all your questions to fill in all the blanks in between. So of course bald eagle, our national symbol. How many here have seen a nice adult bald eagle in the Lakeland area? Most people? Yeah, everybody's seen a bald eagle there. Actually the most commonly observed bird now in our area here. As a matter of fact, where we sit right now, we can look across the lake over in that direction. There's a nest of bald eagles. If you go to the water tower, there's one nearby there. About a half a mile east of the water tower, another nest. Down the Bearskin Trail, just a little bit, another nest. Actually, within a mile of right here, we have 5 pairs of bald eagles nesting right in the island city here. So they've made a remarkable recovery. That was 0, some years ago. So the bald eagle is a nice big raptor. It's a member of the group called the sea eagles, or fish eagles, that eat fish as their main diet, and they live along lakes and in the sea. In North America here, we have the bald eagle as the main sea eagle. Occasionally over in Newfoundland, we get the white-tailed sea eagle, nests now in Scotland and in Europe. The white-tailed sea eagle, similar to the bald eagle, colored a little differently, but that's very, very rare in Newfoundland. And then from Russia, in the Aleutian Islands, comes the Stellar's sea eagle. And also very, very, very rare, occasionally gets into the Aleutian Islands. But normally we have the fish-eating eagle, the bald eagle. If you go out west, and the western states, you have golden eagles. Golden eagles. a whole group of eagles. And the golden eagles do not nest in Wisconsin, but they winter here now along the Mississippi River and in southwest Wisconsin, good numbers. And those wintering golden eagles really don't come from out west. Where they come to winter here is from far northern Canada. They come straight south from far northern Canada. So many people confuse the bald eagle with the golden eagle, and they have completely different plumages. But mostly around here, I've never seen a golden eagle in this area in 36 years around here. So we mostly have, or we do have bald eagles here. When you look at bald eagles, you can't tell them apart, male from female, based on their plumage. They look exactly the same. Males and females look exactly the same. However, in the eagle world, along with many raptors, the females are bigger than the males. So if you see them sitting side by side, two adult bald eagles, and one is really big and one is smaller, poor little guy, then you know, you can tell the sexes apart. They become mature and get their white head and white tail at 5 years. Before that, they're called immatures. So the first year, right now, the birds that were born in the nests here around our area fledged sometime in late July or early August. And those birds, those first year birds, are really dark. And they're actually the biggest eagles we have. You know, they stand really tall, both males and females, because their feathers are longer. They don't have as good muscle development as the adults, so to compensate, they have longer wings, longer feathers, and people say, oh, the eagle was so big, it was a golden eagle, it had to be, it was so giant. Nah, it was just this year's young bald eagle, first out of the nest. They change their plumage, they get kind of mottled in color in the second year, third year. By the fourth year, you can really start to tell they've molted into kind of a white head and white tail. And then 5 years and beyond, they have the white head and white tail. The average eagle flying around is probably about 10 years old, adult eagle, probably about 10 years old. The oldest one from banding studies in Wisconsin, 32 years old, living in the wild. Well, that's tailing off. We might get some older ones yet, but 32 years. They eat fish is their diet. They like to catch all kind of fish. And I say the smellier dead fish, old sucker floating on a lake for 10 days, they love it. That's what they like to eat. They have a terrible sense of smell, poor sense of smell, so they don't mind chowing down on dead fish. And as you know, they're great scavengers and eat a lot of roadkill, especially white-tailed deer. As a matter of fact, the number one cause these days of mortality in eagles is being hit by a car. Number one cause of mortality. Just because the state can't get those dead deer off the highway fast enough, and we have a lot of eagles around. So that's the life of the eagle. They build these large nests. They're highly territorial. So an adult pair will form a territory that they defend against all other adult eagles. If you're familiar with the willow flowage, a large body of water, there's 8 pairs of eagles on it. In each bay of the flowage, a pair of eagles nest. That's their territory. They'll build 1 or 2 nests in the territory. White pine is their favorite tree. Big, tall, super canopy or sticking above the rest of the trees, super canopy white pine. The average nest height in our area here is 76 feet after a lot of measurements to the nest. And the tree is about 90-foot tree that they average that they nest in. But white pine they love, sometimes red pine. And that's about it for their biology. They winter from banding studies just south of here. So we know now that the adult eagles, those that are breeding pairs, nesting in the area, hate to leave their breeding grounds here. So we see eagles all year round, and ice fishermen and winter-killed deer and deer that weren't recovered during the hunting season are eaten by these eagles all winter long. The immatures, those that are not yet adult, do move south, and they go as far east as Kentucky on big reservoirs, and southern Illinois, Oklahoma on the west, not too much further south that. About mid-United States as far as they go in the wintertime. And return then here when they're more mature and try to find a mate and find their own territory and establish a nest and so forth. So that's a little bit about the eagles. The fall of the eagles, what we can say is, say it's the year 1700. And when the first Europeans came to America, bald eagles nested throughout the continent, throughout North America, wherever there were rivers or lakes big enough to hold a population of fish. So widely distributed. Probably the East Coast had densities similar to that are now in Alaska, where about every mile there's a bald eagle nest in the Alaska coast. We probably had similar densities in Chesapeake Bay and Georgia and the other Florida and the Atlantic coast also. What happened to them in the next 200 years was we came, right? Europeans came, didn't have any game laws, things like that, and pretty much shot them at will, cut down their nests, converted forests to agriculture, things like that. So they declined by 1900. They were pretty much really scarce across the continent. It was only in the more remote areas, northern Maine, UP, northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, some places in Washington, Oregon, that they remained just because of indiscriminate shooting. And you would think that in those places they would increase, but they didn't. They were pretty low numbers, and some early research started to determine why, after we did get some game laws, particularly in 1940, the U.S. Congress passed the Bald and Golden Eagle Act. It's an act of Congress because it's our national symbol that protects the bald and golden eagles. So after 1940, it was illegal to take or kill any bald or golden eagles, so they had full protection, but they weren't increasing at all. By the 1960s, people became concerned. Some of the first people were the Audubon Society, and to Wisconsin came a fellow named Alexander Sprunt, and he did some surveys with a light plane, looking for eagle nests, collected some eggs for contaminant analysis, things like that. Early on then, and by 1963-64, the U.S. Forest Service in Wisconsin was concerned on the Nicolet and Chequamegon forests, and they began protecting nests and doing some surveys. And also a fellow named Charles Sindelar. Chuck was an independent raptor specialist interested in eagles, and he got grants and funding from the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, to begin doing some surveys in the 60s. And based on collecting eggs and looking at it, there was a mystery. Why, indeed, weren't the eagles recovering now that they were protected? What was going on? And the mystery was solved by science. The actors, again, were Audubon, this Chuck Sindelar, and the University of Wisconsin system. Professor at that time, Dr. Hickey, J.J. Hickey, who was really a student of Aldo Leopold. And he and his graduate students led an effort in Wisconsin, similar efforts in Michigan and out east, to discover what was going on with not only eagles, ospreys, a hawk called the Cooper's hawk, even robins were faring poorly. And they determined, after a lot of research, collecting eggs and doing a lot of work, that it was indeed DDT. We knew that. So DDT was developed during World War II and was very effective at killing insect pests on ag fields and in forests. And it was a part of the organochlorine group of pesticides. And they were used extensively, and they killed the insects, but they washed into the environment, and they broke down into the next little substance that washed into lakes and rivers, got into the smallest organisms and fish, and then bioaccumulated in the food chain. So when the eagles were taking a nice big walleye or a sucker or a northern pike or something like that, they were eating, and they didn't, like we do, what do we do when we catch a fish? You know, we scale it off, cut off the head, cut off the tail, cut off everything, get rid of everything, just eat a little bit that's left. Well, the eagles eat the whole fish. They eat the bones, they eat the insides, they eat scales, everything. And they were slowly, it turned out, getting high loads of organochlorine pesticides. And what happened was the female eagles, these pesticides interfered with her calcium metabolism. And so then she would lay thin-shelled eggs. And it was the thin-shelled egg syndrome. And so they said, this has got to be it. You're welcome. That fella fell over there. I'll take a sip of my beer. Okay, seems like he's okay. So anyway, what happened was the scientists at UW and other places, Fish and Wildlife Service, many groups came together and determined that these pesticides were causing thin-shelled eggs. The eggs wouldn't hatch, and eagles are designed to be top-of-the-food chain predators. So they live a very long life, but they don't have very many babies. Our banding studies show that they average just 1.0 young per nest on the average. And the brood size is about 1.6, 1.7, so small. And high mortality on the youngsters, only about 30% of eagles that fledge or leave the nest in any one year actually make it the 5 years to be an adult eagle. So once the population declined, it takes a very long time for it to recover because of this very slow reproductive rate. And many biologists, even in 1968, were afraid that even if we would ban pesticides, there still would be enough left in our lakes to cause the continual fall of the eagle. Well, the good news is Wisconsin was a leader. This Dr. Hickey, a group from out east, an environmental group, and about 3 or 4 really good citizens groups got together and tried to convince the legislature to ban the use of DDT in Wisconsin. Of course, the chemical company wanted to keep doing that, so they were on the other side, and there were hearings in Madison. And if you're really interested in it, a book is just published by Wisconsin Historical Society. It's just come out on the whole case. It's really an interesting group, a story of collaboration among various environmental groups and citizens groups to ban the use of DDT. Wisconsin was the second state in the union. Michigan was the number 1. Banned the use of DDT. The federal government banned it a couple years later. And at that time then say, okay, let's see what happens with the eagles if they really do recover. So again, this Chuck Sindelar was funded, started doing some aerial surveys, locating eagle nests in Wisconsin. At that time, 100 pairs were known. We could find 100 pairs of eagles that nested in Wisconsin. We count eagles by pairs. We're not 1, 2, 3, all these different kinds of birds, immatures and adults, pairs. A pair of breeding birds is the statistic. So 100 pairs of breeding birds in Wisconsin in 1973. That's all they could find. And all of them here in northern Wisconsin. And even in our Vilas, Oneida, Forest County, over in Washburn, Sawyer counties is where they were nesting. And at that time, when I first started with that group looking at eagles, we made some estimation. Okay, we thought for sure the eagles would continue to decline because the pesticides would stay in our inland lakes long periods of time. We also thought that, gee, if we could get up to like 500 pairs in the state, that would be something really great. So that's what we thought, 30 some years ago. So we started doing surveys with Light Plains, Cessna, Sindelar doing it in the beginning. From '89 to present, the state DNR does it. We do the flights, and we locate all the eagle nests that we possibly can. We have GIS coordinates and things for all of them, and any new nests. And over the years, the eagle population from 1973 at 100 pairs has slowly increased till this last year. We counted 1,300 pairs of eagles in the state. 1,300 pairs of eagles in the state. So we were wrong. Actually, the contaminants, based on environmental studies through the years, did clean up from our inland lakes very quickly, flushed out of the lakes. Not so for the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, where it stayed several decades longer because those lakes turn over much, much slower. We were wrong about how many eagles the state could handle. We thought 500. We didn't realize that for example, the willow flowage for many years had 1 pair of eagles on the big willow flowage, and now 8 pairs. Minocqua area had none, now 5 or 6 pairs, just within almost sight of this spot. That repeated over and over, so they got denser and denser, way beyond what we thought they would. And then they spread south along the major rivers, the Wisconsin, Chippewa, the Wolf River, slowly moving south. Today, we have eagles nesting on the Illinois border in some wildlife areas. We have them nesting in downtown Wausau, over people's houses. We have them down in the Waukesha Lakes in southeast Wisconsin. In 1973, there was one pair of eagles on the Mississippi River from Illinois all the way up the border of Wisconsin. One pair. 250 pairs of eagles in that same stretch of river today. So it is quite a success story. And the rise of the bald eagle was because university people, several environmental groups, and several really good legislators got together and banned its use in Wisconsin early on. Today, we protect the nests. We do our annual surveys every year, locate eagle nests, and then talk to landowners. Gee, you have an eagle nest on your land, you can't cut the tree down, kind of be careful around it, and try not to disturb the birds. And so we've done that. A lot of the information we did get from 1975 to 89 was our banding studies, where two groups of people, again, this Sindelar was the project leader. I led one group, Dave Evans from Duluth, another group, and together we banded over 3,000 eaglets. And so you put the band on, and then you can tell how long they live, where they go to die, where they go in the wintertime, things like that. So we get a lot of good population statistics. We think in Wisconsin, if you're an adult eagle, you only have about a 14% chance of dying each year. So that's a pretty good rate. Only 14% of the adult eagles die each year in Wisconsin. And so the eagles are doing fine. We think in the Lakeland area here in Vilas, Oneida counties, Vilas County has like 150 pairs just in Vilas County. Oneida is fairly similar. We're pretty much at the carrying capacity about how many we can jam into this area and not have high mortality among the eagles fighting each other over territories. There's still some room in central and southern Wisconsin for them to expand. So we've been so wrong about how dense they could get. We don't want to make any more estimations. They might fool us. But the Lake Michigan shoreline only has about 10 or 15 pairs. That could quadruple or more in size. The Apostle Islands, Lake Superior shore, we do surveys there. They were completely gone, wiped out from the islands. And the first pair nested there in 1982. And now it's gone up to about 45 pairs of eagles on the Apostle Islands, which is a very harsh environment there in the Apostles. That's tough to nest out on those islands. But the eagles are doing well. Currently, we do our surveys, protect nests, and the eagle is a biosentinel. Use it to look at what kind of contaminants might be in our lakes and streams. So Mike Meyer, Dr. Meyer is a DNR research biologist. He gave a talk on loons here last year, but he also works with eagles. And he has, and colleagues in the National Park Service up on Lake Superior, and with the Fish and Wildlife Service, have collected blood from eaglets. Climb up in the tree, take an eaglet, draw a little bit of blood, analyze the blood. And they've been doing this for about 25 years now. And so what they've seen is the DDT, PCBs, other kinds of contaminants in eagle's blood has steadily gone down, 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 down in our inland lakes over the last 25 years. Lake Superior in Michigan, it's gone down, but at a much slower rate. So it's still there, but it's now below the level that would cause any kind of reproductive failure. Eggs are being laid at normal rates and hatch at normal rates. So that's all good. There are a couple new chemicals that we're on the lookout for. Fire retardants, like Scotchgard type stuff where you spray on fabrics. It turns out it's manufactured in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And within 5 or 6 years of it being manufactured, started seeing it in eagle blood on the St. Croix River, Mississippi River, even up on Lake Superior. So luckily that's now been changed. Some rules came in to change that formula, so that's good. The other big problem we need to solve is lead in eagle blood. The latest example was just last year. The Fish and Wildlife Service collected from Wisconsin 58 eagles that had been hit by car, found dead for some reason, that were fresh enough to do a necropsy or an autopsy on to determine cause of death. And they looked at their blood and different things. And of the 58 eagles, 60% had some lead in their blood, which is not a good thing. 40% of those 58 eagles had lethal levels of lead in the blood. So they get the lead from lead sinkers, lead baits. When you go fishing, you use a jig or something, get a fish. Fish gets away, the line breaks, has the jig in its mouth. Fish may die at some point. Eagle grabs the fish, takes it up to its nest, and eats the whole thing, including the jig, and gets lead contamination. And the other source is from hunters' bullets, even regular rifle bullets during deer season, where if you look closely at an analysis, when a lead bullet hits a deer, if it hits bone, or even if it hits just flesh, it goes into kind of a fan of tiny, tiny, tiny lead particles. And so that eagles are getting lead from eating, hunter gut piles and things that hunters leave behind, or unrecovered deer. And so both of these, for fishing bait and for bullets, there are alternatives, non-toxic alternatives, and that's something that we should promote, is keeping lead out of our environment. So that's kind of the story of eagles. They're doing well. Their future is pretty good. They'll be continue to be used as a biosentinel for our analysis, our looking at lakes and environmental quality, along with other species, but they're one of them that'll be looked at. And all along the line, an eagle recovery, the cause of the eagle fall was people. People caused them to fall. And likewise, the cause of their rise and recovery was people. It's nothing that Charles Sindelar did, or the Forest Service, or Audubon, or me, or anybody did to help eagles. What really made it happen was you people. You caused eagles to recover because you're here listening to environmental talks. You're talking to your legislators and different people saying, gee, we want a clean environment, clean water, wildlife habitat, things like that. So, thank you very much for recovering the eagle. Any questions?
Okay, we have plenty of time for some questions, and Carol is here, and she will hand the mic to you. Please remember to talk right into the mic. Thanks.
You mentioned that the territories were large at one time and they're getting smaller and smaller. What is the average territory of a nesting pair at this point in time?
Well, if you had a lake, say you had a lake that's like 400 acres, size of lake, that's probably one pair of eagles. 800-acre lake, probably one on each side of the lake. A lake with many, many bays, you might have, one in each big 100-acre bay of a lake, the type thing. I'm familiar with Trout Lake up here, a big, nice lake. 3 pairs of eagles, one on the south, one in the middle, one on the north end, that kind of thing. On the big rivers, like the Wisconsin River, from Rhinelander down to Wausau, we have a pair about every 3 miles on the Wisconsin River. On the Mississippi, it's tighter than that. It's like about every half mile sometimes, or mile, there's a pair. Mississippi is very, very productive. A gizzard shad is a fish they have there. It's abundant forage fish for eagles. So that's about it, about that size. I can mention that, for example, a couple years ago now, on the rainbow flowage here in Oneida County, I thought I'd never see it. There were 3 pairs of eagles within 40 acres nesting. One on one island, one on another island, and one on a shore in a triangle. Each eagle could see the other eagle in their nest. It lasted 1 year, and by the next year, there was just 1 pair of eagles there. The rest, it was a battle. That was too close, for comfort. So.
Question about the size of the nests in your findings. How large do they get? And also, do the eagles have eggs every year? Do they hatch eggs every year?
Right. As far as nests go, when we were doing our banding, we looked at many, many, many nests and made measurements. And at that time, ending in '89, the average diameter across the top was about 4 feet, and the average depth was about 4 feet. sometimes 3. So about 4 by 4, so a little bigger than this table, like that. The nest is really a stick structure, and on the very top, it's not like a robin's nest, like that, where there's a big hole in the middle. It's flat on the top, and it's lined with grasses. It's called a lining, and they just go in marsh grasses and things like that. They'll just pick up clumps of them, bring them, and make a nice mat of grass. Then in the middle of the nest, they have called a nest cup, which is about the size of a robin's nest. And in there, they'll lay their eggs. They lay 3 eggs usually, 1, 2, or 3 usually eggs that they lay. And eagles in their nest, when the adult brings in a fish, they'll consume the whole thing. So when you go up to the nest, you're looking for something, and the nest is usually clean. There's not bones and everything in there. It's clean. But if you start digging down into the line, into the nest, then you start seeing bones and different things like that, and even unhatched eggs down in there. And what the eagles do, like what we do when we clean our house, we don't sweep stuff under the carpet, right? You're not supposed to do that. Well, they do. So if there's some kind of a mess on the top of the nest, they just bring in more grass and just keep building it. That's the way they clean their nest. Just, out of sight is out of mind type thing. And so the nests get bigger and bigger because they keep doing that. Also, the young eagles, how do they, defecate? What happens? How does that work? And even the smallest little babies, just hatched, they might only be 6 inches tall. They're able to get up, kind of move to the edge of the nest, and bend over, and have powerful sphincter muscles. So shoots out the whitewash. And as the adults get bigger, of course, more and more power. And so when your nest is active. You're walking through the woods and you say, gee, there's an eagle nest there. I wonder if there's babies up there in the nest. Just look around on the vegetation in all directions. It's all full of whitewash, then there's baby in the nest. And the second part of your question. Well, they hatch every year. For the most part, we think adult eagles lay eggs every year. But there's been enough instances that occasionally, for some reason, they'll skip a year. And we don't know the answer. They mate for life, and so the same pair, unlike loons, we thought the loons mated for life, but Mike Meyer found out, no, that wasn't true. But we still think it's true for eagles, like Canada geese and things like that. They mate for life. And if one of the adults would die in the wintertime, they'll get a new mate. And so that might be a time where they build a new nest or not lay eggs that year or something messes up their nesting cycle. So it's usually a death of one of the adults that causes them to build a new nest, causes them not to lay. Something happens in their routine. So.
Ron, 2, I hope this isn't. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's better. 2, I hope are not negatives that I hear about this resurgence in eagle. Number 1, loon predation. Number 2, the increase in malaria deaths in the third world by the banning of DDT. Could you address both of those?
Sure. The loons are easy. Yes, eagles harass loons and do take some babies, and they do take some adults on the nest. So eagles do predate loons, but it's not a big part of their predation. So they do it. And if you have people on many lakes and they had to choose before keeping the loons or keeping the eagles would go and the loons would stay. They love the loons better. But there is a conflict there, but it's not a big mortality. As far as the DDT, when the United States banned DDT in the early 70s, and then the world something on pesticides from Stockholm in 2001 banned it worldwide. But they left an exception for countries where malaria is a serious health threat. And so you have to define that, whatever that means. Where malaria is a serious health threat, there's still DDT manufactured and used in some of those countries. And I know there is a controversy. Some countries feel they have a serious health threat, but the World Organization says, no, you don't. And so there's a controversy whether it should be used or not.
Yes, whoa. Yes, Ron, it's my understanding that Alaska at one time had a bounty on eagles and they were killed by the thousands up there.
That's correct. Many states, including Alaska, was the most notorious because they had the most eagles. Had a bounty on eagles during the 50s. And that Alaska became a state in 1950, I think. It was a territory before that. And anyway, the Bald Eagle Act in 1940 applied to the continental United States, and it didn't apply to Alaska. So they could still bounty eagles in Alaska. But then they quit doing that by, I'm going to guess the early 60s or sometime they stopped that there too. So, yeah.
Can I get? Yeah. Speak to me about the relationship between the eagles and the osprey. I happen to live on a lake that has both an eagle's nest and an osprey nest, and I live on a point that's between the two, and we see all kinds of interaction between the two.
Yeah.
Talk to me more about that.
Okay, eagles and ospreys. Most of you are familiar with ospreys, the fish hawk. They're kind of a smaller size of eagle. When you see them flying around, they look a lot like a gull, but they're really an osprey. And they make, I always say, an honest living by eating live fish. None of this scavenging roadkills or yucky dead fish. They take young live fish, pan-sized fish. They can only pick up about a hand-sized fish usually. They nest here in Wisconsin. They winter in South America. They go all the way to South America in the wintertime and back here to Wisconsin. They always want to nest on the top of something, on the very tallest thing. So you see them on the power poles, transmission poles, where the power company has worked with the state for many years, securing all those nests with platforms to keep them in good shape. And over the years, the osprey population and the eagle population suffered the same decline, DDT thing, and then the same recovery. With eagles, we pretty much banned the stuff. Both species were recovering. The eagles build their own nests. They hate structures. Every time we tried to secure an eagle nest that was falling down with some boards, or build them a platform, or build them a nest, or anything, they just built someplace. They don't like us at all. Fiddling with their nests. But ospreys love us, and so ospreys in the state now. We do osprey surveys in addition, do our light plane surveys, look where the nests are, try to find the nests, all that. And then with the osprey recovery program, we put out nest platforms. That was the recovery thing. And so we put out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things over the last 30 years. And so right now, it's in the mid-80s, somewhere in the mid-80s, say 85% of all the ospreys that nest in Wisconsin, 500 pairs, remember, 1,300 pairs of eagles, 500 pairs of ospreys, 85% nest on a man-made structure of some kind. And what happened is the eagles, as they became more abundant, they pushed the ospreys out of nest habitat. Both of them like shallow lakes, shallow water where they can, especially osprey, shallow water where they can catch fish in shallow water. And so I'll give you two examples. One is Pelican Lake. You know where Pelican Lake is in Oneida County over towards Elko over there. Currently 4 pairs of eagles, one in each corner of the lake, and 12 pairs of ospreys. But they don't nest on the lake. They nest on the power line that parallels Highway 45 and then crosses at Monaco and goes on the north side. All of the ospreys nest on. So they've solved the eagle problem there by just nesting away from the eagles. The same is true for the rainbow flowage out here just north of Lake Tomahawk, where in the late 1980s, with our platform program, we had 13 pairs of ospreys on the rainbow flowage, and we had 2 pairs of eagles at that time. Now 8 pairs of eagles and just 2 pairs of ospreys. They really got driven out by the eagles. And same thing, that power line that runs on the north side along Highway J, there's 14 different pairs of ospreys all along that line there. So they've solved the problem. There are places, though, where some ospreys do nest on natural sites or where there's a platform near an eagle nest, and they continually battle. Normally what happens is the osprey will be on the nest, tending its young or incubating its eggs, and some eagle will fly over. Maybe an adult, maybe an immature, just flying over, minding its own business. And the osprey looks up and said, uh-oh, there's an eagle. Gets up off the nest, goes and chases it, harasses it, calls, circles, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then goes back down to take care of its babies. Maybe 15 minutes later, another eagle flies over from a different, it goes up. So it's this interference. It's not so much that they're battling each other, But the eagles appear to be interfering with the ospreys, so much so that they don't hatch their eggs properly, don't raise young, and so the ospreys give up and go nest on the power line away from the eagles. So, which lake are you on? Black Oak, okay, sure. On the ospreys are on the power line. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah, depends. If with ospreys, the female stays on the nest constantly with the young. The male does most of the hunting. And so if the male is away hunting and the eagle flies over, then the female, comes up. So,
Ron, a couple questions.
yep.
The osprey, is it true that the osprey will turn a fish with his head forward for aerodynamic travel? And if that's true, does the eagle do that as well?
Right, the osprey does do the aerodynamic thing and the eagle does not.
Does not.
So the osprey has a routine. So it's flying over, it does its hovering, it sees a fish, plunges down, it only goes about a foot into the water, grabs a fish. So now it has special adaptations in its wrist, which is really it's over here in their wing, so its wrist has a special adaptation to reach up. If you look at an osprey in very slow motion, it'll reach with both wings up, grab some air, and come out of the water, right? And then it'll do another one like that. And maybe a third one. So now it's about 3-4 feet out of the water, gaining altitude. First thing it'll do, shake like a dog. Get away to that water, because it needs to get airborne. Shake, get rid of the water. Maybe another few wing strokes, and however it caught the fish, however tangled it caught the fish, it'll turn it head first for aerodynamics every single time. Ospreys also, like eagles, have three talons forward and one back. The ospreys have 2 and 2. They can rotate that one talon around, and so they're specially designed to capture fish. And ospreys are wonderful. And when you see them perched, when you see an osprey perched, they're homely. They look, what is that? It looks like a pigeon. But in flight, they're spectacular. In flight, they're spectacular.
Second question. We have an eagle on Big Ripley Island that will come back there every night and fly out and fish or hunt during the day. What determines where they build their nest? And if an eagle goes back to the same tree for years, why would they not build a nest there?
Yeah, Big Ripley's on which lake? Quagga, the big island there.
Right.
Well, they do have a nest on the island there.
What, is it still there? Because someone.
Yeah, they moved, the one nest they had moved down.
Okay.
The one on the northwest side, nearer the shore.
Correct.
Up towards the middle of the island, they do have a nest. It's kind of hidden. You can't see it from a boat or anything. It's hidden among, it's hard to see. So anyway, they do have a nest there. And right, they like a big pine tree. They like islands, are wonderful places. Raccoons can be a predator of eagles, and so usually in islands there aren't raccoons. And so they pick islands, they pick tall trees, they pick a spot that's kind of away from other nests of eagles.
I wonder if you could speak to this fact that a few years ago, in the late fall, our golden retriever puppy that was probably about 10 pounds disappeared. And the process of elimination, it was determined an eagle got it. What do you think?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I've heard of people who say eagles have swooped at small dogs. They're not gonna. Eagles are fish and scavengers. Mammals, they don't really like mammals. Golden eagles, however, are just the opposite. Golden eagles are mammal eaters. So jackrabbits and rabbits and things like that, that's, gophers, things like that are golden eagles. But here in Wisconsin, I've never heard of a documented case where an eagle has taken a dog or a cat. I've heard a number of times where they've swooped at it. So it's possible. Even a puppy of a couple months old maybe or something can be, it's not just it's gonna fight back, for an eagle. Eagles can only pick up maybe 8 pounds, maybe at the most. So anything weighing over about 8 pounds, they would have to land on the ground and kill it and eat it on the ground and not fly off with it. So it's possible. I'd say a higher candidate is a coyote would be the best candidate. Many people see eagles around and oops, that must be what got my whatever it is. But if you have cats, Fisher, number one, predator on cats, and coyotes can be a big predator on cats and small dogs too. So the answer is I don't know for sure. I haven't heard of it. So yeah.
So we have a nest on the lake that occasionally has had nesting pairs.
Okay, which lake? Yeah, if you don't
Indian
mind.
Lake.
Indian?
Indian.
Indian. Yep.
And but for the last several years, it hasn't been used. Early this spring, a pair showed up. They spent a week or two kind of rebuilding the whole nest, getting it all ready.
Okay.
We were all pretty excited that
Yeah.
it was going to, something was going to happen, and then suddenly they disappeared and no nesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm very familiar with Indian and Sugar Camp Lakes there, and we survey those. This year, a pair of eagles nested on the big peninsula on Sugar Camp Lake. So that possibly, they moved over there, possibly. For about the last, 6 years, they've been doing very poorly on there. The eagles on the Indian Lake. We haven't, on the island there, we have hardly seen them at all. In the news was a poisoning case for eagles, which was very nearby, and that was our suspicion, that there was no eagles on Sugar Camp or Indian Lake for a bunch of years. That was our suspicion. So, but I think Indian and Sugar Camp could have 2 pairs of eagles. We just saw 1 pair. We've never seen 2 pairs there. So call me at the office, DNR office, if you see stuff happening. I'd be interested in knowing what's going on. So.
Hi. How long do the fledges, how long are they fed by their parents or with their parents? You mentioned they're migrating and the parents don't, which makes it sound like the parents, after the first year, aren't feeding them any longer. I thought it was a few years before they were on their own.
What happens is the work was done by a Forest Service biologist up on the Chippewa National Forest in Minnesota who had graduate students and different people working, observing eagles and what happens. And from their research, we know that once an eagle fledges or leaves the nest the first time, that's usually a disaster. Like ospreys, again, they leave the nest, they can fly, they fly around, they're great. Eagles, they have to practice. So usually the first flight of an eagle out of a nest crashes into a tree, turns upside down, and falls on the ground, unfortunately. And the adults, so they usually, a lot of times, right after fledging, eagles will be on the ground, this year's birds, big, giant eagles. And they're pretty safe from predators. They're pretty big and can defend themselves. But the eagles will feed them. They'll drop fish down there and feed them. And then when they get their flight muscles going, they'll jump from branch to branch and finally take off. And then what they found happens is, in the animal world, it's not so much that the adults teach the young what to do. It's more that the young follow the adults and watch what they do. And from their example, then they say, oh, it's a good place to perch over here. If I perch here and look down, a lot of times there's a fish down there. If I perch over here, if I soar on this bay enough, ooh, there's a dead sucker or something floating around I can get. So, and they found that it's about 2 or 3 weeks that the young stay in the territory of the adults after fledging. So if they say they fledge August 1st, usually by mid-September or so, they're independent of the adults. Sometimes it lasts a little longer, I can imagine, but they're independent. We've had banded birds by October 1st be 400 miles north into Canada from Oneida County, So they start to wander all over the place. So the answer is maybe a month they feed them, and when the young feel confident, they start wandering around, and that's it. They don't see them. The relationship is completely gone. The adults are the adults. The young are the young. They don't stay together at all after that.
We live on the res, and what my question is about
Where are
eagle
you?
feathers. I'm over here.
Ah, there. Okay. I don't know which way to look.
My question is about eagle feathers and whether we can legally keep them
Sure.
and that sort of thing.
Right. The answer is, under the Bald and Gold Eagle Act of 1940, it says you cannot take or possess eagles, and that includes all their parts, feathers and legs. And so it dates back to 1940. That law is still in effect. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, would enforce that law, except for Native Americans who can, for religious purposes, keep eagle parts. For example, on Lac Flambeau Reservation, though, if one of the conservation officers there on Lac Flambeau or a tribal member finds a dead eagle, say, a whole dead eagle, they can't keep it. They must turn it in to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so must we. Any eagle that DNR finds, our wardens or foresters or wildlife biologists find, every single eagle carcass must, by federal law, go to the Federal Eagle Repository, which is in Denver, and near a suburb of Denver. And so every eagle that we collect, and right now in our walk-in freezer in our Rhinelander DNR office, I have probably 40-some eagle carcasses in there over the last 6 months. We have a lot of eagles, and so some die in there. And so what we do periodically then is special shipping crates, send them FedEx over to, it's called the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. And it was kind of an interesting story. It was indeed a military arsenal for many years, and the military didn't need it. They were going to give it away, and the Fish and Wildlife Service said, "Oh, do you have giant walk-in freezers?" All right. So the military turned it over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so that's where all the eagles go. Native Americans then, what they can do is send a letter to the Federal Repository, get on the list, and eventually get a whole eagle for them. So if you're not a Native American, you cannot possess any eagle or eagle parts. If you're Native American, you can. If you find a feather, if you find a whole eagle, it first has to go to the feds and then back to you. So. Okay.
I had a curious event happen this end of June. I was kayaking with a group of friends at the beginning of the Wisconsin River between Land O'Lakes and Conover.
Yep.
We went around a bend in the river, and there was an adult eagle sitting on top of like a rock
Yep.
at the bend in the river.
Yeah.
We stopped and were like, what the heck? There's an eagle on the ground. It jumped off the rock. We could hear it crashing around in the woods. And for the next 5 or 10 minutes, as more of our group caught up with it, the eagle never flew off. It was just jumping around it was an adult, the white head, and we didn't know if it was injured or, like you described, maybe taking care of a baby that was on the ground. What are your thoughts on it?
It was probably injured. When they take care of babies on the ground, they're just dropping fish and can fly right off. They can just fly right away. So it was likely an injured bird of some kind. And who knows, it might have been in a battle with other eagles. It might have had lead poisoning or something, debilitating like that. Unknown. But it was likely an injured eagle. It would have just flown away. They don't go crashing through the brush unless they're injured. What we do find, though, is people report injured eagles when they're really just full of food. So eagles can, they can't lift more than like 8 pounds. At maximum, like 5 pounds would be really a lot for them. So say they're flying around, they see a nice dead fish or a live fish, and they grab it, and they can't lift it. It's too big to lift. Now, some people think, oh, the fish pulls the eagle underwater and it drowns. We've never really heard that. We haven't heard that, because they can just let go. They can lock their talons so that they're really locked, but they can also just let go, so uncontrollably locked. So anyway, so this eagle would catch a big fish that it can't take off the water. So it spreads its wings. Fish is underwater. It's got it. Its wings are here. Now what? Now what does it do? Well, it simply swims to shore. Their wings swim over to the shore. Now by this time, eagles and all these birds are well insulated with down and things. It's completely soaked. So not only has this heavy fish, but it's completely soaked. So it gets on the shore, drags itself up, and shakes off and starts to dry out. Now it eats the fish. And the way they have this giant appendage called a crop under here that they eat and eat and eat and eat, and it just fills up this giant crop. And then over hours and hours, it slowly digests it down into the butter. So the eagle gets on shore, it's completely wet, and it's now eaten the fish, so it still weighs too much for it to take off, right? And so it might sit there for 3, 4, 5 hours on the shore, just sitting there. And people say, oh, I've seen the eagle, it's been there 2 hours, it's not flying. You know, our staff or some of the rehabilitators, folks go out to try to recover it, they get there and it flies away. So that's another thing that can happen, but if it's crashing through the brush type thing, that's an injured eagle. And what to do? If you see an injured eagle, you can call DNR, but that's not the best thing. The best place now that is Wild Instincts, which is down in McNaughton. They have a license for eagles. You need a federal license, and they have the license. So Mark Nanio and Sharon Larson there, they would go out and grab the eagle, or they have volunteers that go out. So it's easy. If you want to do it yourself, the way to do it is if you have a blanket or something to just cover the eagle. If you put on some leather gloves, the main problem is they're not going to bite. They'll try, but biting is not the problem. The talons are the problem. So you have to get control of the talons somehow. Hold the wings in, and then you can just kind of hold it back this way, hold the talons, keep the wings tucked in, and put it in a cardboard box, or just hold it until you can get it to a rehabilitator. So.
Susan, we have one more back here and then a break.
Yeah, we're going to take just a quick break and let everybody get another refreshment, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, folks, we're ready to get going again. Just to let you know, in case another time you want to go to the library, there are 18 people over at the Minocqua Public Library tonight. So they've got a nice crowd over there. Okay, we are ready with more questions.
Thank you very much. First off, I want to give a little plug to a couple of friends groups. There is a local rehabilitation facility right here in Minocqua, the Northwoods Wildlife Center.
Absolutely.
You know, so that is another resource that people can use to help with any questions they have about eagles that might be injured or help rescuing, and they also have their rehabilitation license.
Right, absolutely. But
So
not for eagles, but right.
Yes. But also, I've had the pleasure of living in central Wisconsin near Baraboo, and I was very active with the Ferry Bluff Eagle Council down there in central Wisconsin.
Yep.
And I think there's, this is a little plug for my friends down in the Sauk Prairie area. January 16th and 17th, they have the longest standing Eagle Festival in the state. I think it's now the 28th year this year. So I had the pleasure of working with that organization as well. So I highly recommend it. For anybody who wants to see hundreds of eagles lining the trees right over your heads. My question has to do with you talked a lot about protecting of eagles in nesting areas, but we have a growing population of overwintering eagles. And so is there legislation to protect those overwintering roosting sites? And also, do you know about the wintering roosting areas here in the Lakeland area?
Well, first of all, yes, the Northwoods Wildlife Center here in Minocqua has done a great job through the years of protecting wildlife and things. It's another resource, absolutely. As far as wintering eagles, the rules that protect eagles are federal rules. And federal rules state that you cannot so harass an eagle that causes their eggs not to hatch, their young not to be fed. Going much beyond that, winter roosts is a little bit of stretch of the current federal legislation. So I think what the friends groups like Ferry Bluff folks down in Prairie du Sac and Sauk City down there do a great job. There's a group on the Mississippi River does that. Protecting winter roosts. And so what happens are these eagles, some of them from Wisconsin, some from Minnesota, some from Canada, come down and winter along below power dams, along the lower Wisconsin and the Mississippi rivers where there's open water. Fish go through the turbines and get killed, and so there's a lot of fish for eagles to eat, and they concentrate, feed during the day. At night, they go to a roost site in a valley somewhere, usually where they concentrate and roost. And the concern is they're roosting to protect themselves from the winter weather in these sites, and people going in there would flush them all off in the night and cause them concern. Unfortunately, I currently don't know of any state rules against that. We always refer to the federal rules, and as it applies to winter roosts, you could probably make a case that someone would be harassing the eagles by flushing them out of a winter roost. So you can't not cut the trees or anything. There's nothing like that in any of the federal
Do we
rules.
have similar things here? I've only been up here in the Northwoods for a while, so I don't know if we have.
No winter roosts here. All the eagles winter kind of individually on lakes. They like ice fishermen, so if they see ice fishermen, they'll gather around them. But nothing like a winter roost here in northern Wisconsin. It's not until you get to southern Wisconsin when we really are. Lower Wisconsin, Mississippi rivers.
Well, I know in central Wisconsin it's mostly immatures or a lot of immatures, and that could be another reason why they're congregating as large groups in these roosts. I have another question, though, too, about eagles returning, and you were talking about the territories and the fact that their territory sizes are shrinking. Do you have any information on phylopatry on the birds returning into those nesting areas? Site fidelity for young birds coming back? And is that something that could potentially help with the reduction of those territories, because they're kind of birds that know each other? Corollary to that is, which of the two genders, male or female, actually does the site selection?
I don't know the answer which chooses. I think it's a kind of combo thing. I'm not sure if we know the answer to which sex chooses the territory. I'm not sure on that. From our banding work, the information we know about that a lot of it is from our banding work. And so you put a band on a baby eagle who's born in this nest, and like 10 years later, it's found dead during the breeding time the next lake over. So obviously it came back to the same area as an adult and bred nearby. And so you put that all together over many recoveries, and we can say that the young ones, once they become adults, generally come back to the same region of the state, so north central Wisconsin. Sometimes to the same county or lake we've had band recoveries. But that's about as much as we know. We've had young eagles that were born in Wisconsin, and when they became adult, were nesting birds just across the border in Minnesota. We've had Michigan birds that were born and banded in the UP, nest here in Oneida County and Vilas County. I guess, so that's what I know about that. The most famous eagle, another resource if you're interested, is the National Eagle Center in Wabasha on the Mississippi River. If you're ever down that way, it's great. You should visit the National Eagle Center. It's run by the city of Wabasha, a private group, and they have a beautiful facility, have eagles on display. And one of the eagles is called Harriet, and Harriet was born in 1982 in a nest on the Michigan border in Vilas County. I banded it back in 1982. It was recovered. I recovered it as an injured bird on the Rainbow Flowage in 1998. And so that one was born in Vilas County and was, raising a family on the Rainbow Flowage. And then it went down, because it couldn't be rehabilitated, it went down to the National Eagle Center. It's been there ever since. And so when I went down there this spring, we celebrated 32 years of Harriet being alive. She can't fly. And so Harriet's kind of a known old eagle still alive in captivity. Nowhere was born, nor was recovered, how long it lived, and so forth. So National Eagle Center down in Wabasha is great if you get down that way.
Hello. You're doing a really good job, by the way, over here.
There we are.
Question number one is, what is the mortality rate of eaglets within the first year that they're born?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of information on that. If you put together all the banding work that was done in Chesapeake Bay and Maine and Minnesota, Wisconsin, all these different places, and to get a statistic that's fairly reliable, they're thinking somewhere around 30-40% first year mortality the first year, and about 30% of all those don't only survive to be an adult. So 30% of eagles born this year will be alive in year 5. But the limits on that are pretty variable, so it depends on what state and what's going on. But the young ones are inexperienced, and of course all inexperienced animals, the way of the wild for inexperienced animals is a lot of babies die, a lot of immature things die, and that's the way it is. They have to have a lot of them. You know, eagles are the opposite of rabbits. You know, rabbits have many broods, you know, and have raised a lot of babies, but super high mortality rates. Where eagles live a longer life and have somewhat lower mortality rates. So 30% mortality is not bad. You know, rabbits are 90%, you know, for baby rabbits. So.
Then the second part, is there any competition between the eaglets in the nest at all?
Yeah, the whole competition, the sibling rivalry. You think your kids fight with each other. Holy cow. So the eagles lay eggs about 2 or 3 days apart. So they'll lay an egg and they'll start incubating that egg. 2 or 3 days later, the female will lay another egg and start incubating those 2 and up to 3. So females are big, mean. The poor little males are little guys, innocent. And what happens is if the female, if the egg was a egg with a female in it, was the first egg laid, hatches, and the last egg laid, the third egg, was a male and is like a week or so behind the first egg. And she's bigger to begin with, is being fed right away. And then this one hatches, and so in the nest, you might have one that's this tall, and a little tiny guy, because the eggs are laid different. They grow really fast the first few weeks. And so when food is short, that's the thing. When food is short and the adults can't bring enough food to feed them all, then the little guy, of course, dies. In some of you might watch some of these cameras they have on eagle nests. They had one in Minnesota there and different places. And sometimes, I know a couple of them, they had to turn them off because it was so terrible to see the big, mean female beating on that little guy, pecking at him, you know, like that. So there is sibling rivalry, and it really only happens when food is scarce. And every eagle has a personality. Every animal has within their instincts have a personality. And some males are very aggressive even when they're little, and they can survive that. And some females are really aggressive, and they'll try to kill everything in sight to get all the food. So it just depends on that. So. Okay.
Are the wind farms that are scattered throughout Illinois, for example, proving to have much of a negative effect on the migrating birds?
Not so much for bald eagles, although a few, but golden eagles, unfortunately, yes. The worst one is, I'm going to guess the name is Palo Alto, California. It's in California. I think it's Palo Alto. It's on a ridge that happens to be right on the migration route of hawks, including golden eagles, and they've been killing quite a few. There's currently a big controversy raging between a bunch of environmental groups and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because for some reason the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service gave the wind industry like a 30-year permit that if they kill eagles, they're exempt from the Bald Eagle Act. And so a lot of environment groups are fighting that, saying they shouldn't have that blanket authority. So far for golden eagles, the researchers out there don't think it's affecting the population of golden eagles, but as more and more of these wind farms, if you go out west, some places there's many of them, it may start to influence golden eagles, but not so much bald eagles.
Thank you. And what is the current effect of mercury on the eagle?
So mercury is a little better story. Mercury in our environment comes from power plants, and so you burn coal, and one of the byproducts of burning coal is kind of mercury. It goes up in the atmosphere. When it rains, mercury goes down the lake, and then in the lake it changes to a methyl mercury. Is that methyl mercury, type of mercury, that can get into organisms. And we have some natural mercury in some lakes and places that doesn't do that, but this kind does. And so it can move up the food chain, mercury. So during the mid-1980s, when our banding work, we collected feathers. And birds tend to store any mercury they get in their bodies in feathers, in cuticles, feathers. And so we would collect feathers from eagles, and the feathers were analyzed. You know, the eagle was born in this nest on this lake, and so they looked at the mercury content of that feather from that lake. Then they compared it to fish samples from that same lake and the mercury, and it coincided almost exactly. So if you have a giant deep water lake, who's the guy from Black Oak Lake, type lake, that's 100 feet deep and clear water, you probably have higher levels of mercury. If you have a shallow lake like Pelican Lake, then you probably don't. So far, we don't think mercury is impacting the reproductive capacity of any raptor, eagles, ospreys, and all that. Now, Mike Meyer did work with loons, and he found that loon chicks, there was some impact. And I can't remember the whole answer to Mike's work, but he raised young loons and fed some mercury-contaminated fish and others not, and found that there was a behavioral difference in baby loons with mercury. So it appears that mercury in our lakes is mostly, it's not good for us or anybody, but it mostly would affect baby loons rather than eagles.
On those wind farms down in Texas, they were trying to set up the wind farms to coincide with the migratory patterns. And they kind of, through the computers, kind of worked along with the wildlife service down there so that they would shut down certain portions of the wind farm during the migratory time.
Right. The early wind farms, they would just put them in the best spot, and now the wind industry the subsidies that kind of ran out for those poor guys, but the ones that are currently being built are trying to locate them away from migratory places and things like that. So they're doing a better job now. A sideline about turbines, big wind turbines, turns out bats are really killed by these things. And it turns out the research actually was done in Wisconsin by somebody down at UW, a graduate student, I can't remember her name. It turns out that it's not that the big giant turbine goes around, hits the bat. It's that the bat is flying around trying to catch insects, because there's a light on those things for aircraft and insects. So the bat's flying around, and it gets, when this gigantic turbine thing is going around, there's a vacuum right very close to it when it's going around. And when the bat goes into that vacuum, its lungs collapse and it kills it instantly. So it's this weird vacuum death that these bats have. So they're trying to figure out what to do with that thing. So anyway.
Ron, I was just curious about newly adult eagles. Is there some regular pattern of courtship that happens? Does it happen when they're selecting the nest or in the wintering grounds? How does that work?
Yeah, there's the whole courtship story, and the courtship does not occur on the wintering grounds. It can start actually in February. Actually, in our part of the world here, many eggs are laid end of February, 1st of March. All the lakes are frozen tight and everything, and the eagles will be starting to fix up their nests, the established pairs. They'll be sitting next to each other a lot, what they never used to do. Now they're sitting next to each other. And then as it gets closer and closer to egg laying time, they go through their aerial displays, which is called a cartwheel display. So they'll go up and be soaring around, and they'll lock talons, and they'll, in locked talons, do this cartwheel, go down, 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 and it's away. And they do some of that kind of stuff. So if you see that in spring, it's part of their courtship display. And they do stuff fixing up the nest, keeps the pair bond going and encourages both of them. They'll bring a green, evergreen twig into the nest, like a foot or two long, and put that as a decoration, they call it, in the nest. That means we're ready, and you see that green thing. And they mate on a limb and go from there. So,
Ron, on a number of occasions, I've witnessed an eagle coming down to pick up a dead fish. He'll pick it up, drop it after he gets it a few inches off the ground, swoop around, come back, do it 4 or 5 times, and eventually fly off and leave it there. And it's not 5 pounds, it's a little
guy. Was that an adult?
Yeah.
Yeah. don't know the answer to that one, why they do that. Usually if they see something, they'll take it, rather than leave it behind. Must be some kind of play behavior that they're doing, or I'm not sure. Maybe just didn't like the looks of the maggots on it or something. I don't know.
Anyone else? Oh, all right.
Earlier you were talking about ospreys versus eagles, and I think you said there were 500 nesting pair of ospreys in Wisconsin, 1,300 eagles in Wisconsin, or nesting pairs of eagles in Wisconsin. I live in Florida. And it seems to me, and I don't have numbers, it seems to me that there are a lot more ospreys than eagles in Florida. Do you have any idea? Is it a climate thing? Is it a recovery issue? Do you have any idea why that might be?
No, there are indeed, your observation is correct. I believe there are many more ospreys, like every ballpark and, power pole and light pole and cell tower in Florida has an osprey on it. They've recovered greatly in Florida, and the reason is habitat. Habitat is the answer to, like all the questions about why animals are abundant or not. And just great fisheries and shallow lakes and the ocean there. So ospreys are doing very, very well in Florida, as are the eagles. The eagles in Florida, though, are a sedentary population. They don't migrate. They don't go anywhere. They just stay right there in Florida. They like it. The thing, though, with the Florida eagles is they're kind of shrimps. So in the eagle world, if you are an eagle that lives in Florida, your wingspan is like 4 or 5 feet. If you're an eagle that lives in Wisconsin, it's 5 or 6 feet. If you're an eagle that lives in Alaska, it's 6 or 7 feet. So the further north you go, there's a rule called Bergman's rule or something like that. As you go further north, you get bigger. Moose and all kinds of animals get bigger because they need bigger bodies to resist the cold the further north you go. So, but Florida has a wonderful population. It vies, if you look at states, Minnesota has been number 1, the number of eagles, pairs. Florida number 2, Wisconsin number 3. Chesapeake Bay with 4 states, or 3 states, is in the running there. Then Washington, Oregon, 4 and 5. So,
What is the result when an eagle eats a fish hook?
if an eagle eats a fish hawk?
I've seen him eat a lure, and you have already alluded to the jig. So
yeah.
what happens when an eagle eats a hawk?
Not much. It's been recorded a couple times during eagle banding. We find an osprey wing or leg in an eagle nest. So occasionally they will take them. I think most of the time they were babies out of the nest rather than adults. It's rare that an osprey would let, just like a loon, it's rare that an eagle would let, or that a loon or an adult would let an eagle get it, but occasionally it happens. They eat birds, all kinds of birds. Some eagles are adapted to ducks, much to the dismay of the landowners. If you go to central Wisconsin, in the Necedah area, there's a Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, Meadow Valley State Refuge down there, these big giant flowages, waterfowl flowages, lots and lots of ducks. Well, they have eagles nesting there too. Very few fish, but ducks everywhere. And the eagles have adapted to eating ducks down there. So. Oh, the fish hook. What happens to the fish hook? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I missed it. Okay, so, yeah, it's a bad deal. Most often, what we see for injured eagles, the people who rehabilitate them, who, for many, many years we've been collecting these dead or injured eagles, is the fish line is the most lethal thing. They'll get it caught around their leg or on their wing or something, and the fish line is really bad. The fish hook, a lot of times they'll get it caught on their talon, and they can fly around and do stuff, except if so they have to say they have like a suet bait or some big thing on there, and then they'll perch on a limb, and then the hook will get caught on the limb, and they can't take off, and then they end upside down, and a lot of times they'll just pull it right out of their foot, and injure their foot. Other times they die. So fishing baits are particularly bad. I mean, if you're fishing with especially a surface lure, any kind of surface lure, and you see an eagle around it, just don't fish for a while until it goes away. You just don't want to catch one. Most of the time, though, they get their baits from, fish that have gotten away and died. And yep, it's bad. They do swallow small stuff. Excuse me. And on the on the jigs and stuff, that's a lead poisoning issue. On the bigger stuff, it might get caught and cause problems. Stuff. So all kinds of hooks aren't good.
I just wanted to share an experience I had with a wind tower on a homestead in Tomahawk. It was 90 foot tall. We put up, it was just to power an individual home.
Mm-hmm.
And within a few hours after the tower went up, it was like the tallest thing for we had some white pines near there, but it was taller than that. We had 4 bald eagles came and kind of went around and around it for quite some time, identifying it, and then took off.
Okay.
So,
yeah, looking at it over, saying, what is that thing? They may have been nesting nearby, and saying, what is this new thing in our territory, and what does it mean? So investigating it, and like that. So ospreys, on the other hand, love those kind of things. Here in Oneida County, I think in Oneida County here, I can think of like 5 cell towers that have osprey nests on them, and another 3 or 4 communication towers that have osprey nests. They like them, but eagles generally don't like to nest on them. Cool.
I would love to hear the story about you going down the highway at 60 miles an hour with eagle's talons in your arm.
Well, it was a problem. I was actually racing up to the Northwoods Wildlife Center. This was many years ago. I had an injured eagle. I collected it, and the only thing I had was a cardboard box, and I kind of folded the cardboard box and had it in the seat next to me. And I'm going up Highway 47, and I usually drive around 60, a little bit over the limit, but I'm driving. And so I'm holding kind of the box like this and driving, and suddenly the eagle decides to put both feet right up through, the box, which is not very secure, and grab me like this. And so I'm driving, and it really has me. And, well, okay, it's got me, now it's got me. So what to do, Actually, I kept driving. I kept driving. I thought, I'm going to stop. I'm going to try to get it under control, and it's just going to happen again. So I drove like 5 or 10 miles, and then finally did stop and get it off of me, and secured it and took it up. So yeah, it got out of its box. It was done by me. Normally, DNR, we have wooden, crates that are very secure. That and that day I just happened to have a box. And got it. The deer story is more interesting, though. So I was en Rhinelander at that time. I was stationed at the ranger station, and a call came in. Oh, there's a deer in our badminton net, and he's all tangled up, and he's flailing away. So, okay, I'll come out. So I tried to call the warden, couldn't get a hold of him, of course. Tried to call the forester, my assistant, another forester. There was like nobody. So I said, okay, I'll go up there and see what I can see. I get there, and there's a lady in the house. Any neighbors around? Anybody can help me? No. Yikes. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try this. And so it was, the deer had the net completely tangled, and it backed up, it was head down facing you, but it couldn't go backwards anymore because it was caught there. And so actually, it was not bad. I just kind of went up to it, and just like a cowboy, they're not that strong, and so I weighed more than it, and I got it down, and was able to take out my little knife and cut most of the net away while I was holding it down. And then it ran off with some net still. I couldn't get it all, but it got away. So a note is, when I told this story to my supervisor, I said, never, ever do that again in your life. That's bad news. Anyway. So.
I have a question for you that gets back to a question or a comment you made about interaction between eagles and ducks.
Yep.
I used to lead a lot of wilderness trips for a summer camp in the area, and my campers would always notice very territorial loons and very territorial eagles.
Yep.
And they'd always ask me who would win in a fight, an eagle with its talons or a loon with solid bones.
Oh. Well, the thing is, they would never fight. Okay, so the assumption is you can't answer the question because they never would fight. But certainly, the main defense that a loon has is its beak. If you've ever handled an adult loon, Well, when you handle an adult eagle, you don't have to worry about its beak too much. It's the talons. When you handle a loon, look out for that beak. I mean, it's going to poke your eye out and wants to put its beak right through your head. And so you got to hold it by the neck and make sure that you got to be careful with loons because they don't have a diaphragm. You can squash them. So, but I think if they really were fighting, I think the eagle would win. Mainly because they would usually what they do is they grab on, get it, and just squeeze and don't let go, and the loon can be poking at it, and it'll just. So, I think the eagle would win.
Yeah, I have a question.
Where are you? There you are. Okay.
I've watched the Decorah Eagles from Iowa on their
the Decorah,
cam
yeah,
and everything, and they've had trouble with electrocutions of
Yep.
Do we have that type of
Yes,
problem?
we do. The power companies have been just great with both eagles and ospreys. The electrocutions occur on distribution lines. So the small little lines that go into your cabin or your house, and the big power lines, not hardly any at all. So whenever we've had an electrocution in the past, the power company has tried to do something with that pole. Maybe not every time, but most of the time they try to make the pole secure for eagles. And the way they do that is they attach another, say if here's the power pole, they just attach another 2x4 or pole that sticks up another 4 or 5 feet with a perch on it. So when the eagle comes to land, it lands up there on the perch and not down by the transformer or the power line. But yet we get a minor amount of eagle deaths are electrocution. It's not big, and it's all on distribution lines. So.
Hi. I guess I've heard that you can identify an eagle's gender based on the slope of its head and/or the prominence of its brow. Is there any truth to that, or is it all genetic testing?
I don't know of any way on a bald eagle to tell the sexes apart based on its head shape. There is a difference if you're looking at a golden eagle and a bald eagle, then head shape comes into the category. So on a bald eagle, the head sticks out maybe 6 or 8 inches from its wings. It has a longer neck. And the golden eagle, it only sticks out 4 or 5 inches, so it's short. So if you see a big eagle, especially in the immature plumage, you can look at how the relative length of its head versus, so bald eagles have a longer, skinny head, and golden eagles have a more compact, shorter head.
You mentioned something about gizzard shad.
Yeah.
And I guess there was a report down in central Wisconsin about the gizzard shad populations coming back because of opening up a lot of rivers and removing dams and stuff like that. So I don't know if this was in a newspaper, so I don't know if that was absolutely accurate as far as that contributing to the huge number of bald eagles in the Baraboo area. There were 82 eagles on the Baraboo River, and they attributed to the removing of those dams and the return of the gizzard shad. So I don't know if there's any accuracy in that.
Yeah, I haven't heard about the Baraboo River. I know the dams were removed on the Baraboo River, and it's a free-flowing river now, and likely gizzard shad would now flow up, swim up. So I don't know about that. I know gizzard shad remain abundant in the lower Wisconsin and Mississippi River. It's a huge forage fish, and it's very important for wintering eagles and their nesting eagles. It's about that long, sucker-like fish that lives in the river. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ron. Can we have a hand for Ron? Fascinating comments. Thanks so much to the Minocqua Brewing Company and to all of our sponsors, the Lakeland Badger Chapter, the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and the Minocqua Public Library, Kemp Natural Resources Station, and Trout Lake Station. Remember, our next Science on Tap is October 1st, where we're going to have talk about beer making with UW professor Robin Shepard and Minocqua Brewery brewmaster Ryan White. So get here early, October 1st. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and sign up for emails.